All right, Murph, I just sent you another co-host invite. Hey.
Hey. Yeah, don't know what's going on. Proper glitchy.
Dude, seriously. All right. Do you mind if I just run over my intro again and then we can kind of get this thing off?
Yeah. All day, man.
All right, for sure. Thanks. All right, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. My name is Mason Riney, and you are now officially turned into Mason's Spaces, where myself and occasionally a phenomenal guest discuss IDP, all things fantasy. Really stoked to talk to my guest today. Dude's got a huge heart. He's a great father. He wears many hats, does many things in the space, assisting people. The big man himself, Adam Murph. How you doing, bro?
Hey, man, that's some intro. I don't think I can live up to any of the things you said, but I'll take it. And I'm stoked to be on with you, my friend. It's been a long time, and I'm glad that we get to catch up today.
Yeah, no, for sure. And modest as always, right? So what have you been getting into lately and stuff going on? I read one of your draft articles recently on Fantasy Pros. You got anything else cooking up right now? Like what are your roles in the space essentially?
Listen, so 2023 has been a crap year for me personally. I've been suffering from some illness, which I finally got diagnosed. And so really was kind of the tail end of 2022 and 2023 has been super tough, right? With trying to work out what's going on with my body and like stays in hospital. Luckily, all trending positive now. So it kind of meant that I was kind of in and out. And it's not really how I've been the last 6 years in this space. So apologies to people who might listen to this and think I've not replied to DMs or something like that. I'm normally super responsive and been a bit slow. But at the moment, yeah. So you mentioned the stuff from Fantasy Pros. They've been doing sort of lots of mock draft sort of stuff. So a couple of riders mocks for the NFL draft. I've done some mock Dynasty drafts, some mock Dynasty rookie drafts, some mock redraft drafts, just to get an idea on prices of players, where people are going. I did some IDP stuff, so keep it relevant to here. Breakout players or players that you should, the top 5 players under 25 at defensive lineman, linebacker, and defensive back positions. So players that potentially are by low candidates, perhaps haven't quite broken out, or players at the top of the game as well. So really kind of all those sorts of things. And then, yeah, been working on writing the fantasy football playbook year 4 now, believe it or not. I cannot believe I've written this thing 4 years in a row. So yeah, just been working on getting that out for hopefully some point in June. I'd like it to be the first week of June, but it will depend on how things can get done over the next 6 weeks. So
yeah, for sure. You were talking about your fantasy football playbook. I got that thing out in front of me, man. That was one of the first things, not like put me on, but like made me reassess a lot of things that I was doing and just really opened up a lot of like mentality avenues for playing fantasy in more ways than just, drafting people, right? Like you've got stuff in here, like look at people's Twitters, the impact of COVID on players. This is the 2021 version that I have. Rookie portfolios, you got rankings, you've got any and everything that you could need and possibly more. So if you guys are listening, definitely check out the Fantasy Football Playbook. You can find it on Amazon. You guys have it on your site also, or?
I think so. I don't think the latest version, but I tell you what, anyone that's listening to this, if they want a PDF version of the book, then reach out to me directly on DM, and I'll send you the last version, because it's, the way I look at it, I still think it's very useful year on year. And, as I said, this is the 4th year, and I think stuff that I wrote about 3 years ago is still sort of relevant. But then I also think that you can't be stuck in the same way. So this version's going to talk about a lot more around what's changed in the last 4 years. Because if you read the 2020 version of the playbook, it talks about taking QB late. Well, I don't think that's really as applicable anymore, and to talk about why. So it's actually quite cool to have each of the versions of the playbook, because you can see what changes over time and how strategy changes. And as long as you don't stay doing the same things, you'll always be up there in fantasy football, competing for titles. Whereas if you go in, like, I would say 90% of regular, like, old school leagues, they draft the same way, right? They go running back heavy. Then, there isn't as
Yep.
much strategy every year. And I think, those people are fixated on a plan. And I think this year, the way I've seen drafts this year, I've been doing a ton of best balls, a ton of leagues this year. We'll get into it, right? I
Oh,
feel
yeah.
there's a real opportunity this year to, if you make a small pivot in the way that if you used to be a running back heavy person and you make a slight pivot in that way, it depends on the format and the scoring, of course, then I think you can end up really well ahead of the game, because I think this will probably be the last year, and I'm sort of forecasting here, that running backs, like, I was in a draft recently where 9 running backs went in the first round, and I just don't think
No.
after this year that's going to happen anymore. So I
Wow.
think that's the way we've got to potentially think about pivoting away. So I think it's trying to get ahead of trends before they become the norm, and that's how you stay ahead in your leagues, and that's how you potentially win leagues.
No, 100%. That's one thing I like about your fantasy football playbook that you guys put together, is that it, like you just said, it does advance as the times go. Like, you had brought up COVID, the aftermath of that, and it does seem like that's one thing that I kind of created to my fantasy thinking, is forward thinking, not just looking at last year, seeing what happened, and then assuming that something like that's going to happen again, but just with, I don't know, probably different people. But okay, so you said that you're doing a bunch of best ball. I mean, it seems like you're always drafting or running some kind of league, man. How many leagues are you running?
I'm hoping to do less this year. So I had to create a second sleeper account to run all the best balls, because the problem is, in previous years, I do a load of best balls, and I tend to use that data just to align my thinking. So I tend to collate all that into like an ADP. I find that ADPs are really wonky early season. I think really they only start to get right probably mid to late July. So I find that, and then they go right off the rails like end of August, when all the sort of old school drafters join in and then throw the ADP out of whack, and then it's completely whack. So I think you've got about a month where the ADP is probably true. So I tend to get people that I tend to start leagues with just basically degenerates, and then create an ADP off that. So there's load of leagues I'm running now. If you're interested in doing some best ball leagues, again, drop me a DM. Happy to include you in them. I'm just getting to the end of the first round, but I'm looking to do about 100 best ball leagues between now and July, and then but we'll see how we get on. And then regular leagues, I don't know, 40, 50. I actually don't bother counting anymore. But that includes charity leagues, right? So I sign up and play all the charity leagues, and that kind of takes up most of the time. So I don't like, they're hard because you don't really count them as leagues, because they're charity events and you're really not entering them to win. You're entering them for the community kind of aspect of it. And obviously you like to win, but only one person can win the Scott Fish Bowl every year, and there's 3,000 people. Like, the likelihood of you winning the Scott Fish Bowl is like virtually nil. So I don't go into that thinking I'm going to win the Scott Fish Bowl. I go into that thinking it's just really cool every year to meet some cool people and have a good time, and go where the wind blows.
Dude, the experience of those drafts, the charity ones. I went to the Scott Fish Bowl live draft this year. Phenomenal, man. Got to meet Howard Becker. He put it all on for us. It was in San Francisco. It was really, really neat. It was just something that I had never really expected to happen, and it happened, and it was one of my best experiences in the space.
Oh, totally. So, this year, I'm going to be part of the London live draft.
That's awesome, dude.
And in that London live draft, I believe it's going to be Bob Lund, which would be incredible.
Really?
I've known Bob for years.
He's got this consistency book, right?
Right, yeah. So, and I've known Bob for years, right? So I've spoken to Bob probably on and off about 6 years, and we're good friends. But I've never met him, so it's going to be great. It's going to be a great opportunity to talk to him and yeah, get some insight from him. He's a real legend. So yeah, really looking forward to spending the time with him. and others that will be in that space. So yeah, cool that London is going to do a live draft for the Scottish Bowl, and I look forward to that one. But yeah, just charity leagues are amazing. So yeah, I do a load of leagues. Basically, I'm a fantasy degenerate.
Well, you run the charity league, the 5 Yard does, the FFCC. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So the Fantasy Football Challenge Cup FFCC, it's in its 5th year, which is again, it's mad, right? I kind of jumped on the bandwagon of the Scottish Bowl, but obviously we should all do more, right? If you have an audience, you have people who engage in the audience. Everyone should try and give a little back, and that's what makes the fantasy football community so amazing, right? It's the amount of money it raises from a charity perspective. Now all these charity leagues have popped up. It's really cool and really awesome. So it's his 5th year. This one's a bit different to everything else because it's a 256 team bracket. So effectively, what happens, and you went nearly all the way last year, Macy. You know better than anyone. It's a best ball tournament, 22 rounds. I tweak it a little bit every year, not too much. It's a best ball tournament, and then basically what happens is it's 2-week matchups. So you take the combined best score of week 1 with the combined best score of week 2, and then you either beat your opponent or you're eliminated. So you could be out of the tournament in week 2, or you could do what you do and run it all the way to the end. And so eventually we crown a world champion, and we've had 4 editions of this, and we've crowned 4 winners from 4 different countries, believe it or not. And yeah, it's awesome. We get a load of great analysts who play in this, and I just thought it'd be really cool to have somebody beat like a Joe Pisapia, a Joe Dolan, like a really good fan, a Justin Boone, like to have, because it's just a cool story. Like you could get a guy from who's been playing fantasy football a year, and they can beat Joe Dolan or Justin Boone or Joe Pisapia or whoever else in the space. There's loads of great analysts that play, and beat them in a 2-week matchup. Like that's just a cool story, and that's what happens every year, because I think only one analyst has won, and that was Andy Singleton, who won it in year 3. So yeah, it's a cool tournament. Raise a load of money for charity. If you're interested, drop me a DM, and I'll tell you how you can join. So for us, it's every year we change the charity. We try and pick a really small charity here in the UK that's affected someone in the 5 Yard family. And this year it's MPS Society, who do a lot of amazing work. So yeah, we're just trying to raise a load of money. I think we're about half full, which is cool at this time of the year. So I kind of limit when we do guaranteed invites. So, but anyone listening to this, if they want in and they're willing to donate some cash, then I'll tell them how to do it, and I'll give a spot to anybody who's listening to this for sure.
Phenomenal, man. I really appreciate that. All right, so we're talking about charity league. Well, I will say really quick, in the FFCC, the further I went, the more I kept telling myself that it was for charity. But I'll tell you, man, that 2-leg on the championship, man, I was just sitting there gut wrenched. But
I know.
For a good cause, it was really cool. What is your ideal fantasy football league? What kind of scoring do you like? Do you like taxi squads? Like what is Murph's 101? I mean, you do rank IDP, you do rank offensive players, so you're everywhere, man. What's key for you?
I'm all over the map, right? What's my okay? I'm going to split this into 2, right? My traditional, in inverted commas, is I prefer redraft to. I mean, I love IDP, but IDP is really dependent on like the scoring and the people you're in it with. You have to be in it with people who love IDP. So if you're in it with people who love IDP leagues are absolutely the best. The problem with that is very few people actually play IDP, and it's a mission that no doubt people like yourself have really taken up the course to try and get people to play. So yeah, I love IDP. I love redraft with, I'd say probably more traditionalist like PPR leagues over say, but I tend to always do very well in standard, so I don't know why I should be playing standard. My ideal league is a league with absolutely like nuts scoring. Real custom leagues that require. So I tell you what my absolute favorite league to play in, right? And this is going to give you some ideas for those of you that are listening. So a few years ago, I started a league format called the Rules Mania League. And the Rules Mania League it irritates me as a commissioner, but I absolutely love it, and it's completely bonkers. It's basically you hold two drafts. The first draft is a rules draft, where every person in the league can propose a rule or a scoring change. So it's only one rule or one scoring change. So and then you have to be as a commissioner, and I've learned over the years, you have to be very, very you have to flesh these rules out well before the actual draft started. So you allow people the opportunity to just basically create chaos. One of my favorite rules is to randomize the draft order at the start of every round. So basically, it eliminates the ability to plan your draft picks ahead of time and thinking about like where you're going to be and what ranges you're going to be. And it literally becomes a case of you have to draft who you think is the best player in that round, because you could be picking first in one round and then last the next round. Or you could be picking like pick 2 and then pick 14, or you could be picking pick 12, pick 12, pick 12, 3 rounds in a row. And it's literally adds complete chaos. But there's loads of great, like you can tweak the scoring, you can add positions. A lot of people add IDP positions in the leagues I play in. And it creates chaos, and it creates a completely unique league for you and the 11 people or however many people in your league are playing. And that's what I love, because it's not something that you can ultimately plan for too far in advance. And it's not something that you can, it's not something that's like normal. It's so wacky and crazy that it's just so much fun. And it causes arguments every year, but it's all in good fun. So as long as you flesh the rules out well in advance, it's incredible. So that's my absolute like favorite league is the Rules Mania League.
The Rules Mania League is mad. I thought you were going to say Vampire League too, because that's one that I've done with you. That was also like, it can get missed because you can lose a game and then someone picks a player from you, and then you're like, dude, this is the worst.
Yeah, I love Vampire Leagues. I love Skeleton Leagues. I've written about those on Fantasy Pros as well. Yeah, I love like guillotine leagues are wicked, where just if you have a bad week, you're out. You can have the best team in the world, and then they all just lay an egg and you're done. I think that's crazy, and then it creates the free agency and how you manage your free agency budget. Do you go all in early, or do you go all in at the end? Vampire leagues are cool. My only issue with the vampire leagues is when COVID happened, it became easier to be the vampire during COVID. So because of all the late cancellations of games, the vampires in all the vampire leagues I ran or was part of won, which shouldn't happen. The vampires shouldn't win that frequently. So yeah, but I do love them. TD only leagues, I play in those, which is just you only get points if you score touchdowns. Yeah, I've played in some absolutely crazy league, and literally my goal in life is to break fantasy football. I want to find a league that cannot. I've even done an inverse league. Right, an inverse league is bizarre. So basically, what you do is you're trying to draft players who don't contribute. So, but they have to be on the field. So they have to have contributed something in the game. So if they manage to contribute, say 1 to 5 yards, you get 50 points, and then it goes down the more they contribute. So you're trying to find the people who are so low on the roster that they're likely to contribute in a game, but not likely to be an impact on the game. Like, this is how messed up I am at fantasy football. I will literally do any form. If someone said to me like, "Here's a new format no one's ever played before, should we do it?" I'd go like, "Yeah, let's just do it. Let's try and break it and make sure that we break fantasy football." So yeah, I'll literally play. The only thing I won't do is 32 team franchise.
Too much.
Fantasy football.
Too much.
No,
Yes.
it's not even that. It's just boring. Like, you're literally limited to just one team, and you play with that team, and like you ride and die with that team's performances. There's no skill in it. It's literally like, oh, so you're going to be the Houston Texans. Do you think the Houston Texans owner is going to be playing every week? Like, it's not going to happen, is it? Really? Like, who wants to be the owner of the Texans picking only Texans players every week in fantasy football. Like, that's boring. That's the only format I'm 100% out on. But anything else, auction, love auction. I could talk all day about like different multiple auction formats you can do, but I don't think people want to hear it as much.
I'm not huge. I've done a couple auctions myself. I don't know, just more of like the roughers. Like, you overbid on people. You're not really sure what the field is. I think that's just mostly knowing the mates you're going with and doing things like that.
I talk about in one of the playbooks. I talk about doing like auction drafts live and the ways that you can sabotage people. And one of them is literally to get them hammered before the draft. It's a surefire way to absolutely crush an auction league live. If you're in an auction league live, just get your league mates drunk, palm a few of your beers off, so you're more sober, and I guarantee you'll end up with the trophy unless like you draft absolutely poorly, because you should be fine.
Just let everyone else self-sabotage and you come through and get the spoils, right? That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about IDP for a second. Real quick before I forget, do you have any like IDP crushes or any guys that you just like for fantasy, or that every year that you think that they're just consistent enough that they can bring the business?
Listen, I am the least my guy there is in the market, right? I believe in value. So I don't really have my guys, because I think my guys tend to lead you to make really poor decisions. I've learned this the hard way with selecting my guys. So I don't really have my guys. I do have players that end up on my roster far more than anyone else, but that's purely down to the values that I have on those players and believe that they're traditionally undervalued, and I can get them at a very, very good cost in drafts. So for me, I'm all about value-based drafting. I look at who's available on the board at where I'm picking, and I'm looking at, and this is why I do a lot of best balls, right? I try and work out where values are, and I think about where I can pick players. So I don't really zero in on guys. In IDP, I mean, listen, it's all about, it depends on the scoring in your leagues, and this is where IDP becomes quite difficult to talk about, because it's all dependent on the leagues you're in and the scoring format, and you have to really know and understand scoring format. But typically, linebackers, I want to get linebackers who are going to put up good tackle numbers on pretty bad defenses, because they're going to be on the field more, or bad teams, sorry, and that they're going to be getting more work as a result. So you want to pick a high-end linebacker really, really early off the board. And you ideally want to do it on a team that's going to be pretty bad more often than not. That's why Olakon of the Jags it's probably less likely, because they're starting to trend up as a team, right? But, he's someone. But then I would also say I'm totally out on him after this year, because his contract is so prohibitive that I doubt he's going to be on the roster in a year's time. So this is where you're looking at what they're doing in that room, and it's going to change significantly. And the problem with IDP players is, unless they're like the Aaron Donalds or the TJ Watts of this world, very rarely do you get like multiple top years out of IDP players. So like, you'll get a few that will be up there, but typically it's much harder to be consistent top performer in IDP. So you've got to be really fluid, and probably more than redraft, you've got to look and be ahead of the curve on the regression. So there's certain players that are just the way that they've trended. Devin White is a good example of this, right? Devin White is going to be overdrafted in every single league this year. He's just going to be overdrafted, because people are going to look at Devin White, see his production, but he doesn't want to be on the team. He's probably going to end up on a new team. And if he doesn't end up on a new team, he's probably not going to be overly committed to being as good as he was. And we're seeing decline year on year at Devin White. He's nowhere near where he was in 2020. He's in a weak negotiating position to move on anyway. So is he a guy that's all in? And again, you could look at Shaq Barrett. It's exactly the same. I'm just speaking Buccaneers players, but I could do this across the board. Again, I think, Floyd Olakon is a player that could see some regression this year. And then you look at, say, someone like Petrie of Houston, right? Who, and I've got him as the best the best DB in the game, right? And in terms of fantasy football scoring, but is he likely to be there as number one in 2023? Hard to say. That's what I mean. It's like, it's hard for him to go and put the same season in. So he's going to be overdrafted. So he's probably not going to be on many of my teams this year, because people are going to buy him at the premium that he's at. And so this is why I don't have my guys, because it all depends on market fluidity. It all looks at where players are going in drafts. I want to pick the best range, possible. And by the way, I don't have my guys on defensive line because defensive lineman scoring is just so bad um, in IDP, and it's something that we should fix, right? Because the IDP scoring for defensive linemen is so bad that outside of the top 6 guys, it's pretty much moot. It's so irrelevant. You have too many guys bunched together. It's like tight end scoring for offense. It's just so bad it doesn't make any impact whatsoever. So, I just think you're better off looking for value and try and find those guys who are undervalued. There's always guys undervalued every year. I still think TJ Edwards is undervalued this year, despite what he's done in the league. So look at guys that are going to be undervalued. Players who have had down years who are likely to come back. I think last year's rookies, I look at those guys in particular and think those guys are players that are going to be undervalued because people are waiting for them to produce. And actually, you should buy them before they produce because they're going to return much better value for you.
Yeah. So what are some key, I don't know, do you look at stats in your ranking process to try to identify the trends? Are you looking at, we'll say a defensive lineman, right? A guy with a lot of pressures like Rashawn Gary. I thought that he maybe might have hit the curb. He got injured. People are still freakishly high on him. What are maybe things that you're looking at to, project forward forecasts?
Right. So when I do projections, right, you have to start at team level and then you project down to player level, right? So for me, I'm trying to work out what that team is going to do. So if you're just getting into projections, offense, defensive, I'd say defensive is much harder than offense to look at projections, but you're basically looking at what teams have done over the last sort of 3 years. And if they've had a coaching change, then you have to take this into consideration and you try and map where the coach has gone previously, like where he's coached previously. Is there likely to be a change in system? Is that going to cause an impact, etc.? So you have to be a little bit fluid with the numbers. But effectively, what you want to do is try and understand what that team has done for the last 3 years. And then you end up getting these numbers of what they've done. So sack numbers, pressure numbers, all the key metrics, tackle numbers. And then what you're doing is you're assigning a value to the team. So you're saying, right, I'm going to say this team is going to get, say 900 tackles or whatever it might be, or this team's going to throw for 5,000 yards or whatever it is, right? And then what you start doing is you start then assigning those numbers to the players. So then you start looking at that and thinking, okay, how many is this player going to have? Obviously, for passing yards, it's pretty easy. There's one quarterback, you would assign them 99% of the yards, and then whoever whoever comes in week 18 or just comes in for some relief every now and again is going to take the rest of it, right? But when you get to IDP, it's a little bit more tricky. So you have to look at the production on the defensive line, the production at the linebacker level and the DB level, and start to assign those values. Now, where it becomes tricky, especially for DBs are the hardest to rank. If you ever look historically at rankers who rank at the start of the season and then where their numbers are at the end of the season, and mine in particular are awful. Like they're really bad because there's too many metrics that are scored for defensive backs that are completely out of their control. Interceptions and passes defended. Like you cannot legislate numbers for those because one, the schedule changes every single year, so the offenses they face is different every single year. Therefore, putting together a passes defended number is basically, I don't want to say pulling number out of thin air, but it's much harder to put those numbers together in a more accurate form. And then again, interceptions are completely random in most cases. Like you can't legislate for interceptions. It's the same legislate for big touchdown years. And this is why when I do offensive projections, I look at touchdown, positive and negative regression and where they are to the mean. And you can do something similar for the interceptions, but even then, it's just incredibly difficult. And we've seen this with players in recent years who have got 6 interceptions, 10 interceptions, and then they get very few the next year. because it is completely random. They need the offense to be in a situation where they're under pressure to throw the ball more. Then you need that offense to take more risks. They need to be playing quarterbacks who are less in control than, say, someone like Aaron Rodgers, who doesn't throw many interceptions. You need to get people that are completely wild and happy to throw those interceptions. And then that comes to the randomness of the schedule. It's just like interception numbers they are completely random. It's almost impossible. So DB scoring because they're so heavily weighted towards those kind of impact plays are so random, it's very, very difficult to project. Whereas linebacker projections tend to be not too bad.
Does everything have a rhyme and reason?
I think it depends on your scoring. I would always draft safeties over corners in what you would say a traditional IDP league. However, there are some corners that are of appeal, especially if you can get safeties. If you can get safeties.
Maybe safeties that kind of come in the box, rove around, play a little slot, things like that. You there? Oops. Are you on mute? Nope. Okay. This space is being very glitchy today. Hold on one second, guys. I can't really hear him or anyone. 1 second.
Sorry. What?
No, you're cool. It's been happening all day. Man. Keep on going.
Where were we at? So we were at. Yeah. So.
Corners, right? Corners over safeties, or safeties over corners, and then you were saying maybe a safety that can come down. I think is what you're saying.
A safety that comes down is obviously going to be higher. I'd always take safeties over corners in traditional scoring, but there are some corners in. There are some corners that are always worth looking at. I think corners get undervalued quite significantly. I think there's definitely corners that you can get very late in drafts that turn out to be very decent fantasy producers year on year. So I always keep an eye on them. If you play in cool IDP leagues, I know Iggy's listening and he runs a really cool one. They add a bit more value to cornerbacks that I think is therefore makes you want to draft them more. Our mutual friend May Simo does a league where cornerbacks are far more important than perhaps they would be in a standard IDP scoring space. So you have to look at the scoring of your league. But I try to find Nate Davis, right, who writes for us, and he's taking a bit of sabbatical. Hopefully he's coming back, right? He came up with an IDP plus scoring that makes more of the positions fair. And I think that we need to get to an industry standard where that some scoring like that, and there's a few. Jordan Rains did IDP 1, 2, 3. I think there's different variations of this, but we need to come up with a scoring where DL and DB, especially corners, get reflected more in line with their value of where they are per position, because they are undervalued significantly, or they're just underrepresented in scoring, and we need to change that.
That's the hardest. Yeah, that's the hardest part about IDP, though. Is like you said, it's kind of like a points give out wasteland as far as it varies from league to league. There is no, are you playing standard, you playing PPR, you playing half? Like what? I agree. You guys came up with IDP plus, so they're in the making, but I don't know. Hopefully in the future we can come across some standard, and maybe I really feel like once there is that standard set in the ground and we have kind of that foundation down for IDP, then it'll really start to rise and take up. But right now, too many people are out of it, and I don't really think a lot of the people that make leagues most of the time really go with the scoring. I know Sleeper adapted IDP 1, 2, 3. But like you're talking about earlier, it's hard with Sleeper because I really want them to have all the players like now. You know what I mean? Like PYs and things like that for ADP, but it's just not something that happens. Everything's just more geared towards the offensive side.
Yeah, they just don't. They just don't value IDP because it's such a small percentage.
No, they don't.
It's such a small percentage of the market. I've tried reaching out to them. You've tried reaching out to them. We all try reaching out to them. Yeah. And they're an awesome company, right? They just have other priorities and
love them.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, one day they'll value IDP as much as regular fantasy football.
As soon as start bringing in money, maybe. Huh? But okay. So, what are you going to tell a new GM that's trying? I don't know, just fantasy for the first time, or IDP for the first time, or anything for the first time? what is some advice that you would give them, or maybe some mistakes to kind of look for and not fall into?
Okay. So I would say there's 5 things, right? The first one is do not take last year's performance as written gospel, especially in IDP. Last year's performance, if you look at players that ended up in the top 12 of their position in IDP, very few of them actually were in those positions the year before. And that's what I'm saying. There's a much shorter shelf life at the elite level of IDP players. It's so much harder to be consistently great at that level for that long because you're more likely to get injured, you're more likely to get just differences. And then here's the most common difference, right? And Jacksonville, again, I'm going to keep using Jacksonville. A team that goes from last to first in their division is a great example of where IDP value tanks because all of a sudden their offense is on the field more, which means their defense is on the field less, which means guess what? They have less time on the field to make plays. And that means less production, less numbers for everybody. Right. So here's a great example of, and I know Olakon kind of disputes that number a little bit because he was still awesome, but he wasn't as awesome as he was the year before. And that it was on a different team, which is obviously going to be part of it. So just like certain numbers you can't take for granted. Sack numbers you can't take for granted because again, they're not as random as interceptions, but again, it relies a lot on circumstance, what offensive line they're playing, the schedule plays so much into it. It's hard for players to get consistent 10 plus sack seasons. Like that's rare. So yeah, I think just don't take last year's numbers as like, and touchdown numbers. The amount of people that look at players' touchdown numbers and go, oh, well, that's going to copy the following year. Like it almost never does, unless it's like a reasonable number. So I have a touchdown regression model. And if you're sitting there drafting Jamal Williams this year, I'm going to, unless you're picking him up in the last round in the hopes that he's going to be awesome, fine. If you're drafting him in like the 8th round, I'm going to just hit you because he's not going to score half as many touchdowns this year as he did last year. So just don't take last season's numbers as like a given. That's the first one. The second one is don't reach for position. So if you see a run on players in drafts, the most common thing people do wrong is go ahead and reach for the next player because they're worried about position scarcity. And actually, all you're doing is you're shoving value down the board. So if you see a run on like 7 quarterbacks going, unless the next quarterback on the board is one that is significantly higher rated than everybody else that's left, don't take him. Like, just don't do it. Don't take the next guy thinking, oh, well, if I don't take a quarterback now, then I'm going to be absolutely stuffed. Which leads into my third point, right? Tiers. Create player tiers. Whether you know how to do this or not, if you don't know how to do this, there's good rankers, good content creators out there who create tiers. So if you don't know how to create a tier, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. It's not for you to create tiers. But follow the here's the best advice I can have to anybody. Find the 4 or 5 content creators that you love more than anything and take their tiers and then amalgamate them into your own tiers. It's the quickest way to create your own rankings, your own personalized rankings. Creating rankings takes like 3 months, right? You go through all this data, you mine all this data, you then wind it down and push it through different levels, as I kind of alluded to earlier. Not everyone has time to do that. And I get it. I struggle to do that. I have a day job. I don't do this as a full-time job. This is a hobby plus, is what I like to call it. So, like, just do the quick way, which is take the people who you value more than anything. If you're struggling to find those people, best people I can give you are people like Joe Dolan, Justin Boone. There's so many great guys. Justin Barnes for IDP. Master IDP, Mace. There's so many great guys. Find your guys, take their tiers, merge them together, and then that's how you create your own custom tiers. Because what you don't want to do is copy, say, Adam Rank's tiers on their own. Because a savvy drafter like me will know that you're just reading off Adam Rank's script. And then I'll be like, oh, okay, so you have this guy valued next. I'm going to mess with you. I'm just going to take him. And I've had that situation where I've been in drafts and I've literally worked out who somebody's drafting off by their rankings and gone, oh, okay, you're drafting off Adam Rank's rankings. Cool. Good to know. So I know exactly who you're drafting and when and where. So I can really mess with you, really mess up your game plan. That's quite good. So don't be that person. But if you merge from 3 or 4 rankers or 3 or 4 people that you really go on with, then do that. That's like the quickest way to create rankings / be unique, because you'll have your own values. And then if you have a player who you like more than certain players in the tier, move them up or move them down. It's your list. Like, don't have to just follow an expert. Like, if you think that, say, let's find someone.
I think like Loa Hufanga last year was a guy that I was really high on that I didn't really see a lot, but I just figured because of his production and where he was in his career that he was finally going to become an IDP asset because he's more of a boomer bust guy.
Yeah, exactly. So you put those people where you think they should be, right? And that's how you do it. And if you can create tiers, you just start to give yourself an angle. And then what you do is you draft the best. You look at your tiers, and if you line them up on a piece of paper, you don't follow what everyone else is doing. You look at your tiers, you start crossing players off the go, and you think, okay, so I have a guy at tight end who is like a tier above everybody else. But the running back, there's no different. I've got like 6 guys in my running back tier. I've got 4 guys in my wide receiver tier, and then you just sit there and you try and work off 2 boards. You work off how many players are left in each tier and then which tier is elevated above everyone else. And that's how you start to get value. So don't just chase what everyone else is doing. Be contrarian by using value. And it might be that the 8th quarterback coming off the board here in a row might be the best value. Like, that is possible. It's rare, but it could happen. But just make sure you come. And then that leads into my next one. Be prepared for drafts. Like, too many people try and wing it and then they get stung, especially if you're in leagues where the scoring isn't the same. So one of the things about doing 100 plus best balls in the off season is you can get a bit of draft fatigue, which is good and bad. It does mean that because you know all the ADP values pretty much how they should be, you know when players are going to go, so you can be pretty prepared and fluid in drafts because you think, oh, I know this player is likely to go in this range, so I know if I want him, he's going to go. I need to grab him at this pick because I know he's not going to be there for the next pick, and then that's where you're not reaching for guys, you're taking them where you think they should be, or maybe slightly going ahead. Maybe you take them 1 pick earlier than their ADP or 3 picks earlier, but then they're not going to be there on the way back, so that's absolutely fine. But the other thing is you can go into autopilot mode and just pick players because it's just so easy. You end up picking a lot of the same players because that's how what happens when you're in autopilot. And then the last thing I would say is, and this is the one that people forget more, I think, have fun. Like, people take fantasy football, and myself included, right, far too seriously. So, like, just have a laugh of it. Get to know the people in the space. Like, just reach out to content creators, thank them for their work. Reach out, ask content creators questions. There aren't many content creators that won't answer questions from people. You'll get a few, but not many. So just ask questions and grow a sense of pride in what you do. Like, I try and win everything. So I try and do a rookie league every year where I try and get people who've never played fantasy football together before and try and put them together in a league so that everyone's on a similar base. And then they can all grow to love fantasy football together, or you get some that don't take it up beyond then. But then I also grow the next generation of fantasy degenerates, and then they come and play in my leagues and donate money to charity and all that. So that's how I, always keep new audiences fresh, is by doing this sort of thing.
Got a farming system. That's funny. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna switch gears here and kind of go more towards like the draft. I got like 10 more minutes here. Yeah. So, okay, you do evaluate college prospects, I'm assuming?
I wouldn't say I evaluate all of them, but I try and evaluate as many as I can.
For sure. Okay. Are there any guys that you've seen this year that you do like, or you think that are like not landing spot dependent? So, like for me, I'll say Zay Flowers, wide receiver out of Boston College, and JSN, wide receiver, Ohio State. I think those are like the 2 wide receivers that could probably fit in and be fantasy relevant in any scheme. Do you ever consider something like that, or do you just wait until the cards fall, see where guys are drafted, and then you really start to kind of get a better picture of what's going on?
I'm less bothered about where players land. I'm more worried about the draft capital spent. Right. So I think one of the greatest myths fantasy football prospecting, especially when it comes to the draft, is too many people are obsessed where a player is going to land, and actually most of the time it's pretty irrelevant. It's actually more dependent on their draft capital. The draft capital is a much bigger indicator of whether they're going to be a success than actually where they land, because it might be, and there's always rarities and misnomers, and you always get late round draft picks fly and all this sort of thing. But actually, players historically that get drafted later on just don't do well. It's just pure and simple. So actually, where they go in terms of how high in the draft is far more important. So I've got to be honest, right? This draft class, I don't love it. I like it. It's okay. There's a lot of dudes, right? There's a lot of guys that are going to have very nice careers in the NFL. Are there going to be that many potential Hall of Famers in this class who are going to be absolutely elite standard level players? No. Like, my favorite player in this class is Will Anderson Jr., right? I think he's going to be an absolute elite player in the NFL. Like, I think he's going to be exceptional. Outside of him, I don't think there's many. I don't think there's many players. I think Luke Van Ness is going to be a player keep an eye on. As you say, JSN. I think Quentin Johnston is going to be special. I think Brian Branch, safety from Alabama, I think is going to be a very good player. I think Broderick Jones is slightly underrated. He's a player who I think could have a very nice career. Jordan Addison, slightly worried about his size, but think he could be pretty good. And then Max, Michael Mayer, hopefully at tight end. Be nice to see a really cool tight end go. And lots of people are talking about like Bijan Robinson, like how have we not mentioned him as probably one of the best running back prospects ever? Because running backs were fading away from this, that we're not going to get many more bell cow running backs. So he might be a great generational talent, but actually is he going to get the opportunity to thrive as much as possible? And I really don't like the quarterbacks in this class. Like, I think CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are good, not great. I think they're fine. I think they'll have reasonable NFL careers as starters. And when I say reasonable, I'm kind of putting them like mid-level, like in that sort of 16 to 20 ranking of QBs in the NFL. So like they'll have decent careers. I don't think either of them are going to be top 10 in their position in the NFL. And don't get me started on Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, because there's just absolutely no hope for them, for me personally, in the NFL.
That's funny that you say that. So I'm drawing a blank.
Don't get me started on Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson is the most overhyped prospect in the history of the NFL.
Well, there's a bunch of guys in this class, like you were just saying, sorry, can I caught my feet here, that are really equally level, like they're on level playing field. Like I'll use the safety class, for instance. Like you mentioned, Brian Branch. Anyone outside of him could be really good in certain systems, but they're not just like an overall really like a Will Anderson at his position. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of players in this class that are okay to good players. Like they'll make very nice careers in the NFL, and they'll do reasonably well. But they're not the elite. There's no like, if I'm sitting here looking and grading like a genuine first round talent compared to previous years, there's maybe 10 guys. There's maybe 10 guys I would say are genuine first rounders in most years of drafts. I think outside of that, I don't think there's many more.
If you are Houston and you have that number 2, we'll say Bryce Young's off the board. Are you going to take Will Anderson, or are you going to draft the quarterback that falls to you?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I'm doing this on another podcast in a couple of hours, right? I believe as a GM, right? So I don't think they're going to do this, but what they should do is take Will Anderson Jr. One, he's the best player in the draft, hands down. It's not even a competition for me. Best player in the draft by a mile, by a country mile, right? This is a guy who potentially could be one of the best at his position. And that's not an understatement. He's an elite player, right? But not even the fact he's the best player in the class. The rookie quarterback contract is a cheat code for GMs, right? And we've seen this in recent years. Teams that have a rookie contract quarterback on a rookie contract have gone to the Super Bowl, right? It's happening almost yearly now. Originally it was a thing with Russell Wilson, but we've seen Joe Burrow, we've seen Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes. This is happening most years. And you want to draft that quarterback when you are near your build, right? So when you've got a team that's almost ready to compete and you need the quarterback, that's when you want to draft your rookie QB and maximize that. Because what you can do is you can build the elite players at other positions, and then your quarterback might take a year for them to settle, might not, whatever it is. But eventually, at some point in that rookie contract, you're going to have this elite team with a quarterback who's finally settled. And if they're worth their weight in gold, then we'll be able to take you to the promised land. And I know this doesn't always work, but you're kind of dependent on the draft class and where you draft, etc. I get all of that, right? But in an ideal world, you're going to take a quarterback that is going to be a near elite prospect that you can really mold and shape to the next level once you've got the good players around him. Because too many times a quarterback gets drafted. New York Jets is a great example. They draft the quarterback too early. They surround them with no talent. And then what happens is said quarterback fails, partly because they've got no talent, partly because they're not allowed any confidence because they don't win many games and they don't get on that run. So if I was the Texans, I would take the best player on the board. I would continue to build my team over the next couple of years, and then I would draft on. Like you've got Davis Mills. I know Davis Mills isn't the greatest quarterback in the world, but listen, I think Davis Mills is a perfectly serviceable quarterback. I think he's in that sort of 20 to 25th best quarterback in the league. And do you know what? The Texans are not even the 25th best team in the NFL, nor will they if they draft Will Anderson Jr. next year. So why waste the pick? Why waste a year of that rookie year contract by taking, whether they get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young? I don't think Davis Mills is that much of a step down to either of those players. Like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are going to be good quarterbacks. They're not going to be elite level quarterbacks. We're not talking about here. They've got the opportunity to get a Trevor Lawrence, a Justin Herbert, even Tua. That's not who we're talking about here. They're not talking about getting a player of that ilk. So I would pass. I would take Will Anderson Jr. Or I would see what was on offer for those that were really desperate to get one of CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. And I wouldn't trade back that far. But hey, if someone's like in the market, like the Colts, like if the dream scenario would be the Colts, right? And you might not get Will Anderson Jr., but you get the pick of the rest of the board. And there's some great players you could take there, like Jalen Carter. There's so many good players that you could take, like great players that you could take. Lucas Van Ness, who I think is the next best edge off the board. There's so many great players. Tyree Wilson, if you didn't like Lucas Van Ness, you could do it any kind of which way you like. So,
what is it that you see in Lucas Van Ness? Because I see him on tape and I get it. Like he does have flashes of it, but he's another guy that is a very physical dude. Do you really think he's going to have that physicality success at the next level? I think that he has to learn a decent amount before he can be successful. If you put him as like a Bravo next to a guy, like maybe the Lions get him, or someone that already has their A piece on the outside, that's kind of where I think that he would have the most success early in his career. What is it that you see?
I just think for me, I look at Lucas Van Ness and just think here is a player who, as you say, I think he does need to learn, and I think taking him and going to a team where he's effectively going to get that time without that pressure. So he's not going to be. If you put him on a near playoff ready team and you put him out there to be the starter, I think, and if the pressure is on him to win, I think you're sitting there and you're really struggling, right? But I look at Lucas Van Ness as the highest ceiling prospect outside of Will Anderson Jr. I think if Lucas Van Ness can put it all together, and this is what you're doing with draft picks, right? You could sit there and pick a really solid contributor at edge, and that's fine. But really, you want to find the guy who's going to go above and beyond that. You want to find a guy who can compete at the next level and be potentially one of the best players. And you look at and the Jets did this with Mekhi Becton on the offensive line a couple of years ago. Mekhi Becton as a prospect was clumsy, didn't have his technique sorted, was a player who needed a lot of development. And then guess what? By the end of his first year, he was almost a Pro Bowl level offensive lineman. And that's kind of where I see Lucas Van Ness. Is like the defensive line version of Mekhi Becton because of his size, the way that he wins, his desire, character for me in what I see in Lucas Van Ness is outstanding. I just think every interview I've heard of his, and I think that's a big part that is under evaluated in the process. I just think that desire and willingness to win. I really see Van Ness as someone who can be an elite contributor. It's going to take time. I don't think he's going to come out in his rookie year and win rookie defensive player of the year. But I do think by year 2, year 3, he could be an absolutely elite player if he follows that trajectory of his career that can follow through hard work, determination, and experience.
Yeah, I have Tyree Wilson as my number 2 guy at Texas Tech. He is a physical guy that really, he's huge. He's got the length. But he is overly physical, and that's how he wins a lot of stuff. So, like Van Ness, I think he's going to learn. I just think that he's a little bit more ready stature-wise to hit the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for me they're very close. I think you can. I don't think I can't kill that approach. I think they're very close. I think those two they're a tier or 2 tiers down. I think Will Anderson's that good that I wouldn't have another tier. I'd literally have a vacant tier, and then I'd have these two. But I think both these players are in the next tier, and I don't think there's anyone that joins them.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Murph, is there anything you want to plug or say before we wrap this thing up, brother? I really appreciate it.
Look, I mean, I'm very lucky to work for Fantasy Pros, and I do stuff on there. And there's the Fantasy Football Playbook, the FFCC that we've all talked about. I think for me, the stuff we do on 5 Yard Rush. Now, 5 Yard Rush is a UK-based fantasy football website, and there's a lot of guys that we've just incorporated to start writing there. So give them a shout out. Check out the work there on 5rush.co.uk. There's some IDP stuff going up at some point. There's college stuff. There's all sorts of stuff on there. Check out our podcast, the 5 Yard Rush podcast. So we've gone for a bit of a change. We do a flagship show, which is more redrafted strategy based, but we also do Dynasty and college, and hopefully maybe we'll do some IVP stuff as well. If Nate comes, Nate's had some stuff, so hopefully he'll be able to come back and do all of that. But yeah,
5 Yard's where I got my. And I love 5 Yard. I check you guys out all the time. So.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, we just and if you're really interested in contributing in the space, then come reach out. That we'll have a home for you. I think we don't pay people. We just help develop people into content creators, right? So I'll give you very honest feedback and help you get to where you want to get to, and that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, definitely. The foundation for my career was set at 5 Yard. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you.
Really appreciate. Go ahead.
I really appreciate you and everything you did for us and staying in contact. And yeah, man, it's good to see what you're doing. I love the spaces, love the pods, and everything you're churning out right now. You're just killing it, bro.
Dude, I really appreciate that, man. Hard work. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Every week that I do rankings on IDP, I'm trying to make sure that I'm beating my Yoda over there, man. I'm trying to beat you, Murph. But you ended up beating me out this year, so I'm coming for you next year, brother. But
it was tight, though.
Yeah, it was really, really tight, and that's cool for me, man. Like, it's just even to be on that ranking system, like you said, just to be a part of that Fantasy Pros and have that title, man. That's so cool. That's like, I don't know, it's kind of like the kid in me is all excited. You know what I mean?
Oh, awesome, man. Well, look, just keep grinding. You're gonna get there. You overtake me at some point. I'm just a hack.
I'm just happy to be able to be in a position where I can interview you, man. Thanks for coming on, dude, and thank you for all that you do in the space. Seriously, you got a huge heart. You're one of the most modest people I've ever met in my life, and you consistently crush it as a human. So that's going to do it for Mace's Space this week. We'll catch you guys next week. Probably have more draft information, things like that, with the draft going on this weekend. So catch us then. Later, guys.